All right, YouTube model Rocketeers. I'm building a Saturn V from Estes here. And you have to cut these wraps. And I've got a tip for you. When you cut these wraps, you need to draw your blade across a straight edge. And what I did was, I took my straight edge, you may not see it, but there's a piece of tape here that's got the straight edge taped down to the cutting mat and the wrap on both ends. There's a piece of tape here. So when I'm drawing my blade across there, I don't want this straight edge to move. I want it to stay steady. And it's a fairly long cut. And if you try to hold it and make part of the cut and keep holding it and continue your cut, you're very likely to move it a little, move your straight edge. So take your straight edge and fasten it to the wrap, fasten it to your, take your straight edge, fasten it to the wrap and your cutting mat with some tape so it can't jiggle. And that way you'll get a perfect cut along that straight edge with your blade. That's one tip for putting together really any model that uses plastic wraps. All right, here's another trick I have when you're cutting the wraps. When you want to cut the excess off and you want to make a measurement from these corrugated tubes, you can take a stick and butt it up against there, right up against these tubes. Get it just, you can feel it butt right up against there. And then, when I did this, I had my finger on that, I was holding it down. Then you can make a mark. Then you can come down to the other end and lay your swab stick and just butt it right up against the bottom of these corrugations. You can feel when you've got it perfectly tight and square up against those corrugations, you can feel that. It's not up there now, but I held it with my finger in place up against there and then made my mark. So now these marks are exactly the same distance from the bottom of these corrugations. You don't have to try to use a ruler, because with a ruler you can make a mistake trying to read the ruler with parallax error and whatnot. But by using a swab stick as a gauge, a measuring gauge, you can get your marks dead perfect and then line your straight edge up against the marks and make your cut, which is what I already did on this side. So now I've got my straight edge lined up on the marks I made using the swab stick as a marking gauge. And I've got my wrap taped down to my cutting board. I've got tape securing this area and this whole area so this straight edge cannot move. I got it perfectly lined up with my pencil marks. You may or may not be able to see that. And that thing's not going to budge. I'm going to get a perfect cut there. So you can see now I've got that dimension and that dimension exactly the same because I used my stick to lay it out. And this width from here to here is exactly the same as this width from here to here. So these are going to line up perfectly on the body tube. All right, here's a tip about applying your wraps to your tube with the spray adhesive. Excuse me. I did a test. I took an old cardboard tube and a piece of scrap wrap material. I sprayed that wrap material in the cardboard with the adhesive and waited, a little bit of time for them to get tacky. And then I started applying this piece of scrap onto this tube to see if there's any ability to wiggle it around or, you know, move it, and you can't. You can completely remove it and put it back on, but if you put it on there and wrap it all the way around and then try to make some little rotational motions with it, you know, say to get the ends lined up or something, you can't do it. So you have to be super careful when you put your wraps that you get them really lined up right off the bat. Now, like I said, you can pull this off and reposition it, but you can't make little fine adjustments. It won't slide. You can't slide that wrap around this way or this way. Definitely, before you apply your wraps on your Saturn V, do a test. Get yourself a cardboard tube and a piece of scrap wrap and play around with it and get the feel for how it's going to go before you put your wrap on your model. You might make an unfixable mistake. All right, here's a trick I came up with. I'm going to try and see if this works. I got this wrap exactly lined up on that tapered piece, perfectly dry. And once I got it perfectly lined up, I put a piece of tape across the joint. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this off. Then I'm going to spray the inside of this with the adhesive and spray that tapered coupler that's under there with the adhesive and let them get tacky. And then when this thing will be off, I'll slide it down very quickly into position. And since I've already got it perfectly wrapped and lined up, when I drop it into position, it should be perfect. Instead of trying to wrap it around after the fact, after applying the glue. I don't know if this is going to work well, but we'll see here in a little bit. All right, here's what I did. I masked off the wrap on the outside so I don't get, I'll just spray it like this to get adhesive on the inside. And I masked off the body so I only get adhesive, you know, right where it belongs. And then after I get those sprayed with adhesive, I'll take this top mask off so that thing will fit, and I'll take the mask off of there, slide it into position, and hope like hell it works. Well, that didn't work because as I was sliding the wrap down, a little bit of it contacted the body tube before it got all the way down. And the minute this came into contact with that tube, it stuck. And it was about 3/4 of an inch above its final resting place. So I just had to peel it off and wrap it by hand as carefully as I could all the way around. And actually it came out 99.8% perfect. I've got a 32nd of an inch offset at the joint there. But that's okay. Maybe not even that much, to be honest. But it worked to hand wrap it. My little sliding cone trick just did not work. So I think this will be fine. I just dry fit this wrap. That's just held on with a piece of tape. But I wanted to see how the joint would look. And it's a really good joint. I don't know if I'm supposed to cut that little bit of flash off or not. I think you're supposed to leave it there to give the glue something to hang on to. But in any case, this is going to work out fine. Now the next thing I did on this Saturn V build is I masked off the areas where the wraps go. Everywhere there, that's where all the wraps go, so that I only have to prime and sand these areas just to save myself some sanding and a little bit of primer. And if you want to prime these so you can get rid of the spirals, you don't need to prime where the wraps go. So you can mask those off. When I cut my rocket nozzle washers off, I threaded them onto a swab stick so I don't lose them. When you cut these things off, put a finger on there just as you cut that last piece, because it'll shoot across the room if you don't secure it with your finger. All right, here's another tip for you. When you put this wrap on that's got these extensions that come forward, if you use the spray adhesive, these things may not completely lay dead flat and attach down. They may try to pop up a little bit. So after you've got that thing in place, go around and inspect every one of these. And if you can see that any of these edges are lifted up, get underneath of there, underneath that lifted up spot with a little bit of plastic cement. And then you can take a swab stick like this and use it to push down on there firmly. I would use two hands to do it, but I'm holding the camera. But you can push that stick down and hold it. And hold it along each edge in turn as need be. You know, if certain edges are lifted up, push down hard with this stick. Instead of coming at it like this, put it sideways like this. You can get more pressure on the entire length of it. You'll hold pressure on there for 30, 40 seconds, and these edges will go back down. You don't want these catching airflow when this thing's in flight. You don't want air getting underneath of there. If you have any little gaps at the back, it may not be that big of a deal, but well, you don't want air coming underneath. Same thing, you go around the front edge of these wraps and inspect them. And if there's any lift up, put some plastic cement and push down with a stick. Hold pressure like that for a little bit. Use both your thumbs to do it. You know, an inch or 2 inches at a time. Work your way around if need be. Or just find the places that are up and, you know, cement them down. You don't want air getting underneath of there. Okay, here's something I didn't show when I did it at the time. Before I had these masks in place, I only had this mask. You have, not mask, wrap. Before I had these wraps in place. Once you get this bottom wrap, you got to extend the line up from this tunnel, and there's another tunnel over there. So these weren't on here, this was just bare body tube, but I laid this angle aluminum on there, you know, got it down nice and flat, and then I just struck my lines all the way up the tube on either side of that tunnel. Then I moved this thing over to here and lined it up on this side. So I struck my lines using a piece of angle iron, angle aluminum. Estes also makes this yellow thing that you could use, but I didn't use it because I didn't have it. But I use this piece of angle aluminum to strike those lines up from those tunnels. You can see I did it wrong. Those two didn't count, but I've got those two lines, those two lines, those two lines there, and these two weren't necessary. But that's how I got my tunnels lined up off the bottom wrap. Well, here was a profound disappointment. When I put my shrouds, if I butt them up against the little corrugations there, the back end didn't flush with the aft end of the tube. So if I move it so it's flush with the back end of the tube, this edge of the shroud is sitting on top of these corrugations. So I haven't fixed this one yet, but I had to go around and cut those corrugations so that my shroud would fit with the back end flush with the body tube and not sitting on top of the corrugations. Boy, you don't know what a pain in the ass that was. I've got this one left to go. Here's how I had to fix it. I put the aft end of the shroud flush with the body tube, got the shroud perfectly centered in the V notch there, and taped the nose end of it down. You can see the overlap of these two corrugations is the same. Then I taped the back end of it inside the body tube, and then I had to go along with a knife and slit along there on both sides, and then take that shroud off and cut out those pieces, and wound up with something that looked like that. If I left this shroud sitting on top of these corrugations, the nose end of it would be lifted up in the air. I want that nose end flat. So that's big fun. I just took a cardboard box and cut V notches in the end of it. You can buy these things, but it's easy just to take a cardboard box. And that way you can work on this end of your rocket, spinning the body around without banging the fins into the work surface. That's an old trick. I put the clay in the capsule before attaching the tower. It makes it a lot easier to hold on to that thing with one hand while you come in with your thumb from the other hand and mash that down in there firmly. Get it down in there really good and secure by holding it absent the tower. Now here's a mistake I made that I don't want you guys to make. You're supposed to strike a line down the entire length of the body tube, and you put the butt joints of your wraps right on that line. There's a butt joint there, and there, and there. And I mistakenly put the butt joint for that top wrap on that line. Well, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to strike a line from this tunnel up the body, and then line up that tunnel with the line so it's lined up with this tunnel. So I screwed that up. So don't line up your butt joint on this upper wrap with your alignment line for the other wrap joints. Don't do that. I might be able to peel that off, maybe, and reposition it. If not, I'm just going to have a somewhat inaccurate model. Okay, when it comes time to cut your tunnel pieces, if you try to cut that with a razor blade, a single edge blade, an X-Acto blade, good luck. That thing is almost uncuttable. But if you want to cut it easy, if you happen to have an anvil cutter, like this Craftsman Handy Cut, that'll cut it like butter in about 2 seconds. If you try to get at this tunnel and cut it to length with a single edge blade or your X-Acto blade, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Now when you cut your tunnels, if you want them to fit really well, you have to undercut this tunnel a little bit to accommodate the curve and the thickness of this styrene here. So I sanded off the bottom right there and then cut a little chamfer to match this angle right here so that this end will fit right in this styrene recess and then still contact the cardboard tube. I use sandpaper to cut that. can see that by cutting a little off the bottom of the tunnel and then tapering this vertical cut. I'm trying to do this one-handed, but you get a really good fit if you just slightly remove a little material from the bottom of this tunnel to accommodate for the thickness of this plastic. Well, here's a fun feature on my kit. On this tower, you assemble these two pieces together. It's not, you can't see on the video, but there's supposed to be a dimple, a peg, and a peg. And then the same thing up here, pegs that fit into dimples. Well, on my pieces, I've got pegs mating with pegs and dimples mating with dimples. So I think I'll just take the 4 pegs and cut them off and then try to align that thing. The dimples and the pegs are to get these two pieces of the tower aligned. But since I've got peg going to peg and dimple going to dimple, I can't use that feature. And in fact, pegs going to pegs is going to make the thing not glue together properly. So I'm just going to cut all 4 pegs off and try to line that thing up the best I can without using the interlock feature. It really ticks me off. All right, so I scraped off the pegs with a hobby knife, and then I held the pieces together with some tweezers. I just held them together at the points, right at these tips. And while I was holding it together, I put a drop of glue, and then I held it for 40 seconds. Then I came over here to the other side and held that together with forceps and put a drop of glue there. And then I flipped it over and did the same thing for these bottom pegs. I held the 2 pieces together and put a drop of glue there and held it for 40 seconds and got the thing assembled correctly and tightly. And the pegs are perfectly aligned and mated. And I had to use tweezers, and also I used my mag eyes so I could see super high mag, see what I was doing. So if your kit comes the same way, you're going to have to do that. Or you could call up Estes and raise hell and see if they'll send you some parts that are correct. But it just took me a minute to cut the pegs off and glue the thing together, so I don't care. This has nothing to do with the Saturn V, but I think I'll go ahead and cut the video here and finish it off with a part 2, since this video is long enough already. So join me up for part 2.